This is Devin with Writing Daily, the show that answers questions about how to write daily, write better, more often, get stuff done with your writing, even if it is a card to your grandmother. Anyway, this is Devin Galaudet. I am the editor-in-chief of In the Know Traveler. I am also the author of the forthcoming book, 10,000 Miles with My Dead Father's Ashes. And whether you are joining me live or whether you are seeing me on one of the various channels or hearing me on one of the various channels like iTunes or YouTube, or I think there's like 10 different things. So I can't keep track of it, but please do consider clicking a link. Welcome, Bruce. Welcome, Amanda. As always, I'm happy to hear questions. Jengis, my friend, it's been a long time. And so today we're going to be talking about suspense. And I know what you're thinking. Well, what is suspense? Well, you're not thinking that. You're probably imagining some college dorm where there's a bunch of girls in the room and there's a murderer on the rampage. And one of the girls says, "Hey, the lights are out. I'm going to go check the fuse box by myself." And we know what's going to happen. But still, we are going to watch this poor, hapless girl methodically walk to the fuse box, and eventually it's going to be horrible and hideous, and we'll call that suspense. I don't know if that's a fair thing. In other words, I think when we talk about suspense, our minds go to authors like Stephen King, who is certainly a master of that. Loose Bruce, I'm glad that you're here. So what are we doing? We're talking about writing suspense, and I would argue you have to have it no matter what you're writing. There has to be some kind of a thing that's going on that makes it exciting and interesting for the reader to turn the page. As a writer, I have my story to tell, and I'm going to keep writing whether or not it's important. Donna, welcome. It's good to see you. It's been a long time. And so we want to craft something that is going to invite the reader, and again, when I talk about suspense, I'm going to start using my cards again. I think it's going to be helpful for those who are paying attention to video. Suspense is sort of like, I believe, one of the key elements that will keep your readers interested. And so I think probably if I was going to say there's a first rule here, you have to have someone that we care about. And I'm mostly talking about in long form writing, but I think this is true in any, if we're writing short stories, I think ultimately there has to be a piece of us that is going to connect to the thing that it's happening to. So in other words, if you're writing a story about Susan and Larry, we have to care about Susan and Larry. At the bare minimum, we have to at least care about one of the two people. If you are writing nonfiction or you're writing memoir, as I have, then you have to get turned on to some degree by the character. You have to like them or care about what happens. Even if you're reading and you're like, this is a flawed character, there has to be enough there that somebody's going to want to keep turning the next page to see what happens to this person. So what's the next thing that you do in order to build suspense now that we have a character that you care about? We have to create some sort of worry. The worry that I'm talking about, it doesn't necessarily have to mean, oh, she's walking to the fuse box by herself. What a knucklehead. It has to be more along the lines of, there has to be something at stake for the writer, or pardon me, there has to be something at stake for the character that the reader is going to have, something important happen. Right? It could be, oh, they're trying to get in college and we're looking to celebrate with that character. We are looking for them not to be killed by the crazed axe murderer. We are looking for them to succeed or fail in a big way. We're looking to see what happens to them. I think, matter of fact, bringing up Stephen King, is that part of us, the worry that we create is when Carrie's becomes the prom queen, ultimately to be humiliated, right? We don't necessarily want the humiliation, but we are now invested in the humiliation once it's occurred. So we want to keep turning the pages to find out what this poor, sad sack of a woman is going to do or experience now that she's been humiliated. Matter of fact, there's a number of scenes where she constantly is getting humiliated, and it's a terrible thing, and we are on her side. So when we're writing our stories, we want the same kind of thing to be happening. We want to be able to write something where somebody else on the other end of that page is going to be turning the pages and going, oh my gosh, I really want to know what happens next. And welcome Oscar, Elizabeth, Denny, dude, and Hallie, welcome. So so once we have the moment of, we have a likable character, or we have a character that we're engaged with, and then we have this worry that we're going to cultivate to some degree or another. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that our new someone and the worry that we are concerned with actually does in fact show up, even if it's a temporary thing. In other words, we want that culmination. In other wor's, the reason why somebody's going to watch a horror movie is because we want to see the terror that happens when the girl at the fuse box and the axe murderer meet. We know what's going to happen, but we're invested in that interchange. And again, I'm not talking about horror. I'm not talking about some particular crime thing where those things are very, very obvious. We're talking about these moments that we have. Like I just wrote a book about my father. And so a lot of what happens in there are these things that are, they're challenging and they're difficult to deal with. And I have to allow my truth to come out where I'm in that uncomfortable position. And you get to watch me go through it. And you get to go with me hand in hand as we walk through this stuff together. And I tell you what really happened. Right. And so that's really the difference between sort of like between a fiction story and a memoir, as an example, is that I'm just telling you my humiliating stories. I'm telling you my uncomfortable stories. And in fiction, we're doing the same kinds of things. We're taking real life scenarios in most cases, unless we're talking about, fantastic reality, like a la Jorge Borges or somebody who, I can't think of the magical realism. That's the term that I'm looking for. So it's plausible, but it's also kind of in an unlikely realm that these things take place. But that doesn't mean we don't care about the writers. That's why we can care about the characters that happen on Star Trek or Star Wars. They're not part of our world, but their world is defined enough and they have enough human qualities that we can go, oh, this is what we are connecting to. And by the way, I think that's a rule across the board. Any character that you are ever writing is that you have to see them as a three-dimensional character. They have to have a certain measure of humanity to them, something that we can root for, like April, welcome. So finally, then what we need to do is, how do we write this thing? We can get into some more details on that for a minute, but I think the most important thing here is that if there is this pending doom, for lack of a better description, that is coming, we want to repeat that. We want the reader to know absolutely for sure that there is something that's going to be taking place. So that means when the girl who's going to the fuse box, and we know that there's a disaster waiting there for her with her flashlight and completely defenseless, to the axe murdering marauder, as she's leaving going, I'm going to go check the fuse box by myself, the whole room has to say, no, don't do that. That's a terrible idea. Oh, there's no problem. There's no axe murderer. That happened at the lake 25 years ago. So there has to be those moments. And then she's walking down the hallway and then she's thinking, well, maybe there is an axe murderer, but I'm stronger. I'm a tough person. I'm going to go to this thing anyway. And so we are reminded as the reader that this thing that's happening is not a great idea. Again, I'm giving you a horror example, but I think this is true of any writing that we're doing where we want to engage our readers, is that we want to present them with this worry and we want to stew on the worry a little bit so they understand what's going on. And by the way, thank you for the likes and the hearts, and please consider hitting the wow button or the like button, because I think that's just a helpful thing. And I appreciate it. And also, so we've repeated the concerns, my little index card for the viewers who are watching this. And here's the important thing. When we finally meet in this moment, we want to, as writers, really slow it down. We may want to leave the room where all the girls are waiting. We may want to leave that room quickly. We may want to leave the the moment where she's in the hallway walking by herself. But once she gets at that fuse box, we want to take our time. We want to really slow down so that the audience can really feel the intensity ratchet up. Because that's ultimately what we're looking for. We're looking at, certainly in a horror book or something that's filled with suspense, we want that to be ratcheted up. We want that excitement to take us there. But that's also true of anything that happens in story. Because I think if you take away the suspense of a story, then what you're left with is kind of the sort of like just the doldrums of life. In other words, why would I pick up a book if my life was so fantastic? Part of what we're looking for is we're looking at connection and interest and suspense and the kinds of things that drive us as humans to feel. And so I think that's what great writing evokes. So ultimately, slow your writing down, slow that scene way down. So anyway, that's what I think I've got for today. This is hopefully going to give a little bit more suspense to your writing, make us care, give us a reason, a bigger worry about what's happening to this character that we now care about, and then bring those worry and the character together and let them fight it out or fish it out or whatever takes place, so that ultimately we can root the success of that character or wallow in the defeat and sadness of that character. Whatever we're doing, let's bring our characters alive so we can feel great about reading these wonderful stories. Anyway, that's what I've got today. Thanks so much. As always, feel free, if you haven't joined me live, feel free to ask questions anytime. I get to them, whether or not we are live or not. I'm going to do a shout out. And of course, if you ask a question about writing and I haven't answered it already, I'm just going to make it a podcast and we'll talk about it together. Anyway, thanks so much for being here, and we will see you again tomorrow with Writing Daily.